Hey guys, in this video I'll be going over radar in the Hornet. First, you need to make sure your radar is turned on. You can turn it on with this switch right here. There's different ways to bring up the radar display. First, you can go to the tactical menu and you can press attack radar. The other way you can do it is with this switch here, sensor control switch right. If you press sensor control switch right, it automatically brings up your radar display. Also, if you press the air-to-air master mode, it will automatically bring up your air-to-air radar. And if you press air-to-ground master mode, obviously it brings up the air-to-ground radar. For now, I'm going to have them turned off and be in regular navigation mode. Now, there are some controls you're going to need for the radar. First, you need the sensor control switch. You really should have all the 5 positions binded, but for the radar, I guess all you technically need is right, left, and D press. You also need the slew cursor. You can have this binded to buttons if you want. It's called throttle designator controller. Or if you want, you can have it binded as axes. First, let's take a look at the air-to-air radar. Now, once you have your radar brought up, you should be able to move your little cursor around. If you can't, then you probably don't have your radar selected as the sensor of interest. The way you can tell which screen is the sensor of interest is with the diamond right here. For example, if I press the sensor control switch down, it sets my bottom screen as the sensor of interest, and if I set it to the right, now it sets my radar, and now I can move around my cursor. This radar display is what's called a B-scope. A B-scope is a very common radar display where left and right is left and right in real life, but up and down on the display is not up and down in real life. Up and down on the display is the range. So things on the bottom of your screen are close to you and things on the top are really far away. You can change the range. Over here, you can get it out to 160 miles, and you can get it as close in as 5 miles. Or you can use your cursor. If you just bump it to the top or bump it to the bottom, you can adjust the range. There are different radar modes. There are the long range modes and the close range modes, but let's take a look at the long range modes first. If you hover your cursor over this option, you can see the 3 different long range modes: range while search, track while scan, and velocity search. First, we'll look at range while search, which is the most basic mode. You can click this button to cycle between track while scan and range while search. Let's do range while search first. Range while search is just designed for finding targets. It allows your radar to search a very big area. So you have this switch down here that adjusts the angle at which it goes back and forth. As you can see, I can do the max, which is 140 degrees. Or I can do 20 degrees, which is just a very narrow piece of the sky. I'm going to leave it to 60 degrees for now. And you can also adjust the bars, which are up here. If you move your cursor, you can see you can do 1 bar, 2 bars, 4 bars, or 6 bars. So the bars are basically the opposite of the angle. The angle is how much it searches left and right. The bars are how much it searches up and down. So if I just set this to 1 bar, the radar is basically just going back and forth in one slice of the sky. If I have it set to 2 bars, the radar will be going like this. It will scan and then go up, scan, and then back down. So the more bars you have, the more elevation you're searching. So the big thing about range while scan mode is that there's no limit. It lets you search as much as you want. If I want to, I could put it to the max, which is 140 degrees and 6 bars. So the bigger you have these numbers set to, the more of the sky you will scan, but the longer the scan will take. If I have it set to 140 degrees and 6 bars, it's going to take a really long time to do a full scan of the sky. But if I set it to 40 degrees and 2 bars, it will scan the sky much quicker. Now, as you can see, the scan left and right is always centered around the middle, but if you want, you can kind of offset it. If I move my cursor to the left and I press TDC D press, that will move the offset, so now it's scanning to the left. It's still 40 degrees left and right, but it's offset to the left side of my screen here. And you can see I can move it to the right, or I can move it back to the middle. You can do the same thing with the elevation. The elevation is always centered around the middle, which you can see with this arrow right here. And actually, as you can see, I have 2 bars set, and that's why the arrow is going up and down. However, I can adjust the elevation to scan more up or more down. And you do that with this switch here, the radar elevation control. You can see I can move the arrow up or move it down. If you want to know what elevation you're looking at, you can do that by looking at your cursor. Your cursor shows you the elevation in the sky it's scanning based on the current range. As you can see, I have my range display set to 40 miles. So if I have my cursor in the middle, my cursor is at about 20 miles away. And right now, at about 20 miles away, the radar is scanning from 4,000 to 14,000 feet. But if I move it up to 30 miles away, at 30 miles, it's scanning from 1,000 to 15,000 feet. And when you use the radar elevation control, that just adjusts the offset. So if I move it up, you can see now it's scanning from 40,000 to 50,000. If I move it down, you can see now it's scanning from negative 16,000 to negative 5,000, which doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to set it back to the middle. Now, one thing here I forgot to mention is that you can actually adjust the angle by bumping the cursor. If you bump it left, you can see it decreases the angle, and if you bump it right, you can see it increases the angle. Now let's go over a concept that's really important in the Hornet, which is the launch and steer. The launch and steer in the Hornet doesn't necessarily mean who you're locked onto. It just means who you have selected to fire a missile at. The way you do a launch and steer in the Hornet is by hovering your cursor over a target and pressing TDC depress, and you can see it will put a star over them. And the star is your launch and steer. So this doesn't mean it's a lock. As you can see, my radar is not locked on to this guy. It's still doing the regular scan in range while search mode. It's just saying, out of all the targets I have, this guy is the one I'm selecting to fire my missile at. And you can see the launch and steer will show up on your heads-up display as a square. There's actually a really easy way to cycle through all your targets. You need to use this button, the undesignate button. If you press that, it will cycle through all your targets, so you can choose who you want as your launch and steer. Now in the Hornet, there's another thing you can select, which is the DT2, which is the second designated target. This only works if you already have a launch and steer. So let's say I want this guy as my launch and steer. If you have a launch and steer with the golden star, if you go to someone else and press TDC depress, it will put a diamond inside of them, and that means they are your secondary target. Now I just lost my targets because they actually went off my radar, but the way you know they're actually on your radar is with the little blip inside. So if I click data and if I click MSI, it removes the data link symbols, so I'll just take them away for now. This is what my radar is actually seeing. So I'm going to set this guy as my launch and steer, and this guy as my second designated target. And if you have that, then when you press the undesignate switch, it will just cycle between those two guys. So if I press the undesignate switch, it makes this guy the launch and steer, and if I press it again, it goes back to this guy as the launch and steer. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you have a DT2 target, pressing the undesignate switch will not cycle through all the targets. It will just switch back between your launch and steer and your DT2. The DT2 is an X on your HUD. And as you can see, when I press the undesignate switch, it swaps the launch and steer and the DT2. If you have a DT2 target and you want to remove it so that you just have a launch and steer, what you do is hover over your DT2, press TDC depress to make him the launch and steer, and then your other launch and steer will go away. And now I have the normal functionality where I can cycle through all the targets. Now let's talk a little bit more about those data link symbols I showed you earlier. If you go to the data page and click MSI and then unbox data to go back, as you can see, that will show all the data link symbols. I go more into data link in a different video, but that is how to show data link on your radar. There's also another important option here that says LTWS, which is latent track while scan. If you have that unboxed, then when you hover over a target, nothing will happen. Latent track while scan is the ability to select something as your launch and steer, like I mentioned earlier. If I remove latent track while scan, as you can see, I can still see the radar blips. The radar still works like normal, but I cannot select anything as a launch and steer anymore. You need to have latent track while scan enabled, and once you do that, if you hover your cursor over someone, now it shows those symbols we had earlier, which allows you to select somebody as a launch and steer. Let's go over some more options with the range while scan page. First of all, if you click silent, then your radar will stop emitting, and eventually these contacts will disappear from your page. As you can see, the data link symbols are still there, but the actual radar contacts are gone because I basically turned off my radar. If you press active, it will do one sweep and then it will stop again. And if you unbox silent, then your radar goes back to normal mode. Next, we have the PRF here, which is the pulse repetition frequency. As you can see, there's medium, high, and then there's interleaved, which just switches back and forth between medium and high. The manual said that if you have it on high, the radar will have greater range, but it will only really work well finding targets that are flying towards you. If you set it to medium, the radar will have less range, but it's better at finding all kinds of targets, ones that are flying towards you, away from you, and to the side. And if you set it to interleaved, it switches back between the two. So I would just leave it on interleaved. These two buttons here that say radar, pry, and mode, I'm not sure what these buttons do. And I don't think the channel button does anything either. The NCTR is non-cooperative target recognition, but I'll talk about that later in the video. Now let's talk about the reset button. If you enter air-to-air master mode, then you can also see the set button. What this will do is set certain radar parameters based on which weapon you have selected. When you enter air-to-air mode, it selects a weapon to use. For example, right now it says 9M, which is for the Sidewinder. But you can use these switches to select different weapons: AMRAAM, Sparrow, Sidewinder, and gun. So as you can see, I can cycle through my gun, my Sidewinder, my AMRAAM, and my Sparrow. And as you select the different weapons, it adjusts the radar into different settings that are ideal for that weapon. Now, if you want to, you can customize these settings with the set button. For example, when I select my Sparrow, you can see it automatically sets the radar to 20 miles. But if I want, I can set it to 40 miles and click set. And then if I set it back to 20, and reselect my Sparrow, now selecting the Sparrow sets it to 40 miles. So what pressing the reset button does is set those back to the default settings for the particular weapon. Now, unfortunately, I think the reset button is broken at the moment because every time I press it, I can't get it to do anything. If you click the data button, you enter this new page with some extra options. For these options, ECCM and LDF, I'm not sure what they do, but I don't think they're modeled right now. The normal button is supposed to set the Doppler filter in the radar. You can switch it between normal and wide, and if you set it to wide, the way it's supposed to work is allow you to see more targets. It kind of makes the Doppler filter less restrictive. However, the manual said at the current moment it's not modeled, so you should just leave it to norm. If you have BRA selected, it will give you the bearing, range, and altitude based on where your cursor is. You can see the BRA right here. For example, if I set my cursor over this guy right here, you can see this guy is a bearing of 358 and he's 19 miles away. Then there's the declutter switch. As you can see, there is a velocity vector and a horizon line. If I press it, then it will remove them. Then there is latent track while scan and MSI, and I already went over these. Then there's color. This removes color based on if a target is a friendly, hostile, or unknown. I'd recommend just leaving this enabled. And the last setting is one look raid. However, this is for a different radar mode, and I'll talk about this later. One thing I forgot to mention is this setting right here. This controls how long targets will stay on your radar. You can click it to change it, but right now it's set to 8 seconds, which means that a target will stay on my radar for 8 seconds before it fades away, and then it will come back if the radar passes over it again. So that was range while search, which is the regular radar mode. Now if we click this, we can go to the second one, which is track while scan. Track while scan is similar to range while search, but with track while scan, the search area is limited. For example, as you can see, I cannot set my scan up to 140 degrees anymore. So your scan angle and your bars are limited, and the purpose of that is to give you a faster refresh rate on targets. Also, when we were in range while search mode, if we had a latent track while scan disabled, as you could see, it doesn't create any track files for us. It doesn't put those symbols. We just have the raw radar returns. And even with latent track while scan enabled, it still only showed the track files when we hover over the target. However, in track while scan mode, as you can see, there is no LTWS option, and that's because track while scan mode will always show these symbols. Right now, you can only see symbols that are created by my plane. However, just like with range while search, if we enable MSI, then you can see data link symbols too. Track while scan is very similar to range while search. If I move my cursor and press TDC press, then I can adjust the center of the search pattern. I can adjust the angle here, the bars here. It has a lot of the same options as range while search. There are a couple differences though. First of all, With range while search, we had to manually adjust the center of the search pattern by moving the cursor and pressing TDCD press, and also by using the radar elevation switch to move the carets here. However, with track while scan, you can put it into automatic mode, and that will automatically adjust the center of the search pattern to center it on your current selected launch and steer. As you can see, this target here has a star over it, meaning it is my launch and steer, and it automatically centers my search pattern on it. And if you want, you can go back to manual mode to adjust the search pattern yourself again. Also, with track while scan, you have the hits button. If you unbox it, it will just show symbols and track files. But if I enable it, it will show the raw radar hits, which are these bricks here, just like in range while search mode. Track while scan also has some more extra options. If you press EXP, it will go to expand mode, which will zoom in on your launch and steer. There's also raid mode right here. If you enable raid mode, it zooms in kind of like expand mode, but raid mode also adjusts how the radar works to try to break up targets. What I mean by that is sometimes if you have a bunch of targets right next to each other, when the radar builds the track file, which is this symbol over it, the radar might think those are all one target. So if you have something set as your launch and steer and enter raid mode, it will try to break them apart and show you if it's actually multiple targets right next to each other. Now I'll go over really quickly what these symbols mean. I already went over this in my data link video, but I'll go over it again. These symbols are called half-foos, and there's a bottom half and a top half. The bottom half is what you're getting through data link. The top half is what your radar sees. If it's circular, that means it's friendly, square is unknown, and a point is hostile. For example, with this one here, you can see the bottom is circular, and that means the data link is telling me this guy is a friendly. However, the top is flat, which means my own radar is picking him up as unknown. Also, if you see a circle with a big dot in the middle, that is an AWACS. And if you see a circle with a dot on the edge and a letter inside, that is a flight member. I already mentioned the circle with the star inside is your launch and steer, which is basically your selected target. And if you select another guy, there will be a diamond inside, which is your secondary designation. And if you press the secondary designation, it turns him into a launch and steer and removes the other launch and steer, which I already mentioned earlier. You also may notice some of these symbols are smaller than the others. You can see these guys are all normal size, but these guys are smaller. If you see a symbol that looks smaller than the others, that means that that symbol is only through data link from an AWACS. If I picked these guys up on my own radar, or if I had them through data link from another fighter jet, they would be a normal size. But if you're getting them from data link only from AWACS, they will be smaller. Let's go into the options for track while scan. I already covered everything on the front page, but if I go to data, a lot of this stuff is actually, most of it's pretty much the same as range while search, and I think I actually covered everything here already in the range while search data page, so never mind then. Before I go on to the other radar modes, it's important to talk about the azimuth elevation page. This only works if you're in air-to-air mode, so make sure you have air-to-air mode selected and go to the tactical menu and press azimuth elevation. The other way to quickly bring it up is that if you have your radar screen selected as your sensor of interest with the diamond, if you press sensor control switch to the left, it will automatically bring up the azimuth elevation page. This just gives you another way to look at your radar screen. With our normal radar screen with the B scope, it's represented with range. So these guys on the top are far away, on the bottom are really close to me. However, on the azimuth elevation screen, up and down is actually elevation. So guys up here are actually higher up in the air and guys down here are lower. So this just gives you another way to tell where things are. As you can see, the yellow box is the current scan area of the radar. You can see I have 6 bars here, and if I decrease it to 2 bars, then this becomes smaller, and I can increase the elevation it scans with the bars right there. Same thing with the angles. You can see right now it's at 20 degrees, but if I set it to 40, this box is going to get, let me reduce it to 2 bars. If I set it to 40, this box is going to get wider. The box also makes it easy to see where the radar is pointed to. If I set this to manual mode, if I set my cursor off to the left and press depress, then it moves the box around. And when I adjust my elevation with the caret moving here, you can see it actually moves the box like this. And if you set it to manual mode, it adjusts the radar center to focus on the launch and steer, and if I do that, you'll see the box move. You can also move the box from this screen. If I set this as my sensor of interest and move my cursor, I can move to set the center of the radar display. Now, you don't want to accidentally click on one of the symbols, so what you can do is you can hold down cursor depress and move it over and then let go, and that will move your box also. So this gives you an easier way to adjust the elevation. Instead of having to move the caret right here, you can simply adjust the elevation by moving the box where you want. This screen also has some other functions. It has the expand function, which just zooms in on your launch and steer. These functions here are all related to the IFF, so I will talk about that later. Also, if you don't like this yellow square showing where your radar is scanning, you can get rid of it, but I would recommend leaving it on because it's very useful. Now, there's also this ID button here. If you hover your cursor over someone, there will be a data block. The data block will give you information about what you are looking at, and the ID button changes what information you see. If you press full, it will give you radar and data link. You can click it again to just give radar, and you can click it again to not give any information. This is another IFF setting, which I'll talk about later. And for the IFF declutter button, I don't think it does anything. But there's also this scale switch here. The scale switch adjusts how much elevation you can see. You can see the scale on the top and bottom. We have 70 degrees here and negative 70. So I can go from 70 degrees all the way down to 5 degrees up and down. Now on the display, if you see a hexagon, the hexagon represents where your targeting pod is currently looking. And the cool thing about this is it allows the targeting pod to integrate with the radar. There are two targeting pods the Hornet can use. One of them is the Lightning pod right here. The other one is the AT FLIR pod. For this video, I'll be using the AT FLIR pod. Now, for the purposes of this video, most of the functionality will be the same. There's only one button that will be different between the two pods, but I will go over that when it comes along. Back to the azimuth elevation page, if you click this here, it goes to the targeting pod mode. And with this switch here, you can choose where your targeting pod is looking at. You can see I can have my targeting pod look at my launch and steer or bore sight. Now, this is where the difference is with the Lightning pod. For the Lightning pod, there's a different option here. I think it says radar slave, so you can just press that. But for the AT FLIR pod, you just click launch and steer, and your radar will automatically move to your selected launch and steer. If I select a different launch and steer, you can see the targeting pod will automatically move over to it. If you want to see where the targeting pod is looking, you can click FLIR display here, and I'm going to change it to FLIR mode, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and it's kind of hard to see, but there is the airplane. That's all the functionality I'll go over with the azimuth elevation page for now. The other big functionality it has is all the IFF settings, but I'll go over that when I get into IFF. Back to the radar, I've already gone over track while scan and range while search mode. Let's go over single target track mode. I mentioned earlier that if you set something as your launch and steer, it doesn't mean you're actually locked onto them. It just means that is who you've selected to fire a missile at. But if you want to actually lock onto somebody like a hard radar lock, that is for single target track mode. So to enable single target track, you press the sensor control switch in the direction that your radar's on. So since my radar's on my right screen, I would press the sensor control switch to the right. If you have a launch and steer selected, it will try to do a single target track on the launch and steer. If you don't have a launch and steer selected, it will try to do a single target track on your highest priority target. So since I have a launch and steer selected, I'm going to do SCS right. And as you can see, I am in single target track mode. The radar beam is locked onto just this one guy. And this is the best mode for tracking someone. This is the hardest lock for somebody to break. However, this mode will alert the person that you are locked onto them. If you have someone in single target track, if you want, you can activate raid mode. It works the same way as in track while scan. It's just used to try to break apart multiple targets that look like one target. You need to have this button selected, RAID FLIR Field of View. If you press it, it will activate RAID mode and it will try to break apart multiple targets. There's also a special option for single target track that's one look RAID. If you do that, it applies the RAID processing without actually zooming in. So what that means is that in the regular RAID mode, it actually zooms in. But if you have one look RAID selected, it will still try to break apart multiple targets, but it won't be zoomed in. It'll just show the targets right next to it, but it'll still be the normal display. If you want to get out of single target track, you can either press this, which is return to search, or you can just press the undesignate button and it will go back to your previous mode. There is an alternative way to enter single target track. If you have a launch and steer selected, if you TDC depress over the launch and steer, that will also enter single target track. So that was range while search, track while scan, and also single target track. There's one more long range radar mode, but first let's go over spot mode, which works in range while search and track while scan. If you hold down TDC depress for a couple seconds and then release, you'll see a little X over your cursor. This will focus your radar wherever your cursor is to try to find somebody really quickly. For example, if I know there's people right here, I can go to spot mode, put it right there, and try to find them really quickly. And if you press TDC depress again, it will get out of spot mode. Let's go into the last long-range radar mode, which is velocity search. Unfortunately, you cannot enter velocity search by clicking this button. You have to enter it by moving your cursor over, hovering over velocity search, and pressing TDC depress. Velocity search mode is the longest range radar mode. However, it also gives you the least amount of information. The display here is similar to the display in the Tomcat. Instead of showing you range, it shows you how fast things are heading towards you. As you can see, I can adjust it from 2400 knots or 800 knots. Something that's heading towards me really fast will be at the top, and something that's heading towards me very slowly will be near the bottom. Velocity search mode does not give me those little symbols, and it does not give you range either. So it doesn't give you much information. It's mainly meant for finding people who are really far away. Also, velocity search mode only works when people are flying towards you. If they're flying away from you, it won't work. That is velocity search mode. The next thing to talk about is the bullseye. In your mission, you have a bullseye, which is represented with this symbol here. And the bullseye is something you can use on your team as a reference point. For example, if I know there is a target right here, I would tell my team members where the target is in reference to the bullseye. So from the bullseye to the target, I would say it's 357 for 22 nautical miles. In the Hornet, you can enable bullseye information on the radar if you want. First, you need to have a waypoint selected as bullseye. I'm going to go to my navigation display and I'm going to get rid of the map. In the Hornet, waypoint 59 should be your bullseye by default. So what you need to do is, in your navigation page, click Data, go to waypoint 59, and then press air-to-air waypoint, and that will select it as your bullseye. If you have a bullseye set, you will see the information right here. And for example, I know this target is 038 for 17 miles from the bullseye. Before we go into the short-range radar modes, we need to go over one last thing, which is the IFF, or the Identify Friend or Foe. If you press the IFF button, you should see some information come up, which means it's on. If you press the IFF button and nothing happens, it means it's turned off, so you need to hold the on button right here. This allows you to detect if someone is a friendly or hostile. There is automatic IFF and manual IFF in the Hornet. The automatic IFF is controlled on the azimuth elevation page. If you don't know how to get into it, you just make sure you're in air-to-air master mode, go to the tactical menu and press azimuth elevation, and you can see all the IFF settings. First, this is the range. Keep in mind, the manual said the range setting here is for manual IFF interrogations only. I would just leave it to the max 100 miles. This is the angle here. You can see 20, and up to 140. I would just leave this on the max also. There are these two buttons here, single IFF and IFF declutter. However, the manual said at the moment they don't do anything. But the buttons you need to worry about are these ones here. We have launch and steer and also auto. If you have this button selected, then it will automatically perform IFF interrogations on everything it sees within the angle here. So I have it set to the max of 140 degrees, and it seems like it happens around every 10 seconds. And the way you can know it's doing an interrogation is because you'll see some lines come up on the side. And these are what the lines look like here. Then there is the launch and steer. This will automatically IFF your launch and steer. I don't have a launch and steer selected, but if I select one, then it will continuously IFF it. That is how the automatic IFF works, but you could also do a manual IFF in the Hornet. Now, when you do an IFF, if something comes back as green, that means it's friendly, and yellow is hostile, and red is unknown. If you want to do a manual interrogation, what you do is move your cursor over someone on your radar and press sensor control switch depress and then sensor control switch to the right. Last thing for IFF is NCTR, or non-cooperative target recognition. To turn it on, you need to box this button right here. If you have that on, then if you're within 25 nautical miles of somebody, and if you are within 30 degrees nose on or tail on, then it will use the radar to interrogate their plane. What it does is it points your radar at their plane, and it uses some sort of processing to try to determine what kind of plane it is. Okay, those were the long-range radar modes. Let's go into the short-range modes now. To activate the short-range modes, first you need to have your radar selected. Make sure you have the diamond right here, and then you need to press sensor control switch up. If you do that, it will automatically go into the first short-range mode, which is bore sight mode. In bore sight mode, you have this circle here, and what you need to do is fly to put the target in the circle, and it will just automatically lock onto them. The next mode is vertical scan. If you press sensor control switch down, it will enter vertical scan mode. Now, if you try it and it doesn't work, it means your helmet mounted display is turned on. If you have the helmet mounted display turned on, for some reason you cannot enter vertical scan just the normal way. You have to enter wide scan first. So if your helmet is on, press sensor control switch left to go to wide mode and then down, and it will let you into vertical scan mode. This one is pretty much straightforward. Let's go into the next one, which is wide acquisition. If you set it into wide acquisition mode, it scans a bigger area and it will just try to lock onto the first thing that is generally in front of you. Also, wide acquisition has a secondary mode. If you press TDC depress, you'll see a cross come up on your HUD, and you can use your cursor to move the radar around. Now let's go into helmet mode. If you have your helmet turned on like this, if you press sensor control switch up, it will enter helmet acquisition mode. Now, if you're looking straight forward, it will actually just be in bore sight mode. But if you move your head, then it will move the radar along with your head and try to lock onto what you are looking at. And if you move your head too much, as you can see, the circle will move off, which means you are at the limit of the radar's gimbal. Now, the regular helmet acquisition will lock things out to 10 miles, but you can also enable the long-range helmet mode, which will lock things out to 40 miles. All you have to do is hold sensor control switch up and release it, and you can see now we are in long-range helmet acquisition. And let's see if I can lock that guy out there. And I got a lock. If you press sensor control switch up, it goes back to regular helmet mode. The last close range mode we have is gun mode. However, there is a special way to enter this. You need to have your gun selected as the weapon. So if you press the gun switch, it's kind of like bore sight mode, but as you can see, it is a bigger circle. Now, if you are in any of the close range radar modes and you want to exit back to the normal radar scan, you can just press undesignate, and you can see it returns to the normal radar sweep. The only exception is with gun mode. If you press undesignate, it will just stay in gun mode. So make sure you switch to a different weapon and then press undesignate to get back into your normal radar mode. That was everything for the air-to-air radar. Let's go into the air-to-ground radar now. There's two ways to enter the air-to-ground radar. Now, if you are in air-to-air master mode, you cannot enter it. So If you are in navigation mode, you can just press surface to enter the air-to-ground radar, or if you enter air-to-ground mode, it will automatically turn on the air-to-ground radar. The air-to-ground radar has different modes. It has map, GMT, and C mode. Map mode is the basic mode, which is pretty straightforward. It just shows a map of the ground. There are different scan types. There's pen and then fan, and you can also adjust the range here just like with the normal radar. You can also press freeze, which will freeze the current screen. You can press silence, which will make the radar stop emitting. And when you're in silent mode, if you click active, the radar will do one sweep and then it will be silenced again. I don't think ECCM does anything at the moment. You also might notice this reset button. If you click data, you can adjust the gain of the radar here. And if you click reset, it puts the gain back to the default setting. You can also adjust the angle that it sweeps right here. As you can see, I can move my cursor around. If I bump my cursor down or up, it will change the range. And if I bump it left or right, it will change the angle. If you press TDC depress, it will put down a cross, which is a little target point you can see on your HUD, and you can press undesignate to get rid of it. There's also these expand modes here. These allow you to zoom in. For example, I can click expand 1, and then I hold down TDC depress. I move this box over what I want to zoom in on and let go, and it will have the zoomed in picture. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the radar is that when you're using the zoomed in modes, because of the way the processing in the radar works, it doesn't work well for looking at things directly in front of you. So because of that, it's better to zoom in onto things that are off to the side. If I click expand 1 and I look at this area right here, you can see now it shows the whole picture. There are not any black spots. You can also press expand 2, which is just even more zoomed in. I can zoom in on this river right here. And you can press expand 3, which is even more zoomed in. Now, when you're in these zoomed in modes, you can use fast to rebuild the picture quicker, but keep in mind it will be lower quality. If you want to get out of any of these modes, you just click it to unbox the expand mode. If you click the data button, all you have is just the gain control, which I already went over, and then you have the declutter option, which can allow you to see your velocity vector. That was the map mode. Now let's go into GMT, which is the tracking mode. This is meant for finding moving objects. This is really good for finding vehicles that are moving on the road or something like that. Now, if you saw a moving object, it would show up as a brick on the screen. I don't have anything right now, but if you had something, all you would have to do is move your cursor over it and then press sensor control switch right, and it would lock onto that target. All these controls are pretty much the same. There is one new control in the GMT mode, which is interleaved. If you are in interleaved mode, it will do one scan where it tries to find moving targets, and the other scan will be a regular map. Next, we have C mode. This is the same thing as GMT mode, but this is designed for finding ships in particular. It works exactly the same. You move your cursor over a target and press sensor control switch right to lock onto it. Also, when you are in C mode, you can also enable interleaved, just like on tracking mode. The last air-to-ground radar mode is the ranging mode. This is used whenever you're doing something like CCIP bombing to get a more accurate range. For example, if I have air-to-ground activated and I enable my gun, once I point the plane down, you can see it enables the CCIP gun cross. And then if I press sensor control switch up, the radar goes into ground ranging mode, and you can see it shows the range right here. That was radar in the Hornet. Thanks for checking out this video, and I'll see you later.